Xeon Lights. She's a spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion. Welcome. I've seen some of your activists claim on TV that billions of people are going to die in quite short order. One of your founders, Roger Hallam, said in April, our children are going to die in the next 10 to 20 years. What's the scientific basis for these claims?
So these claims have been disputed, admittedly. There are some scientists who are agreeing and there are some who are saying that they're simply not true. But, you know, the overall issue is that these deaths are going to happen. We don't know exact numbers, and actually it's a little bit, you know, concerning to focus on just how many deaths. There will be deaths and mass suffering, and that, you know, any amount is enough as far as we're concerned.
But most scientists don't agree with this. Climate change scientists, those who know there is a problem and it has to be tackled and things have to be done, more has to be done that's being done. I've looked through the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the latest AR5, and the October of last year special report. I see no reference to billions of people going to die or children going to die in under 20 years.
Well, I don't think he was claiming that that was from that report.
No, I know that, but what I'm saying is I don't know where the scientific validity comes for that. I mean,
so there's a lot. How
would they die?
Mass migration around the world already taking place due to prolonged drought in countries, particularly in South Asia. There are wildfires in Indonesia, the Amazon rainforest, also Siberia, you know, the Arctic.
These are all really important problems, and they can cause fatalities. But they don't cause billions of deaths. They don't mean that our young people will all be dead in 20 years.
No, perhaps not in 20 years, but I can't speak to what Roger was, you know...
He's one of your founders.
With that. He's one of the members of Extinction Rebellion, yes.
I mean, you talk weather-related disasters. There seem to be a lot of them around at the moment, and people die from them. But on the latest figures I've seen, 100 years ago, weather-related disasters killed 500,000 people a year. Today, it's 20,000 a year. Still 20,000 too many, but it's a reduction of 95,000. It doesn't lead to the 95%. A reduction of 95%, it does not lead to a death of billions. I mean, aren't you scaring people with this rhetoric, aren't you?
I think there's a danger of scaring people simply because we're not taking it seriously enough, and people are feeling really, you know, desperate that we're heard on this. And unfortunately, you know, alarmist language works, which is why we're discussing it right now.
But does it work? It could. I mean, I've seen young girls on television, part of your demonstration, particularly the school ones when they take the day off to demonstrate, crying because they think they're going to die in 5 or 6 years' time.
No, it's not necessarily...
Crying because they don't think they'll ever see adulthood. And yet there is no scientific basis for the claims that your organisation is making.
The young people that I've spoken to aren't crying because they think they're going to die in a few years. It's because they don't see their children as having a future. They don't want to have children. And they're worrying about, you know, coastal regions going underwater, other countries and island nations going underwater, you know, the Maldives going underwater, the mass displacement that's happening, the weather extremes, which may be on a downward trajectory, but climate scientists are telling us that they will be on the increase.
Well, take rising sea levels, because the sea levels are rising. There's no, the UN IPCC makes that quite clear. But even the UN IPCC says that its median projection for sea rising is 0.5 metre by 2100, by 2100, at the end of this century. Now, that will create problems from places from Miami to Bangladesh. But 0.5 metre will not result in billions of people dying. If we do the right thing, it could be managed.
If we do the right thing, but we're not doing much at all at the moment, so this is one of the problems.
But you accept that 0.5 metre would not, if the UN median projection is right, would not result in the sort of apocalyptic predictions that your organisation makes?
They're very conservative numbers, that's what we'd say. And actually, a lot of the data in the IPCC report, not criticising scientists because they did an incredible job, using pre-industrial levels of data. They're looking at carbon emissions. They're not looked at factoring feedback loops, things like this. There are climate scientists saying now that we think it's a lot worse. James Hansen, ex-NASA scientist, is saying we're in a planetary emergency. So we're using that language. We're not trying to use alarmist language. We're listening to what scientists are saying and using language that we feel is appropriate to the situation.
You are losing alarmist language. One of your other founders said that she thought everybody could be dead within several decades. 97% was the figure she put on it. But you want, at the moment, the IPCC policy, the agreed policies to try and cut carbon emissions in half by 2030 and go to zero net emissions by 2050. But you want 2025 for zero emissions, only 6 years away. What would that require?
I mean, I'm not here to give you solutions and to tell you what we should be doing. That's not.
I know you're gumming up the whole of Westminster.
Well, what we're saying is listen to the experts. We're saying listen to the experts. Let's listen to what their ideas are, what they're saying. And at the moment, we're not putting those plans in place. We're not creating policies that reflect what those scientists are saying. This is why we're protesting.
But the experts have a consensus around getting net zero by 2050. You're saying 2025. You're not listening to the experts.
Well, there's some research into the IPCC report that was more recent by Professor Michael Mann, who looked at where they came up with the 2050 figure. And actually, they're relying on a carbon capture, biogas energy storage, BECCS, and there's a problem with that it's an untested technology. And by relying on that, there's a 50-50 chance that we will fail with the 2050 year in place.
You can always pick one piece of research. The fact is the IPCC report has 6,000 scientific references, 91 authors, and is a global consensus with review editors from 40 countries. But let's come back to the 2025 target. One critic has said it would mean the confiscation of petrol cars, state rationing of meat, and limiting families to one flight every 5 years. And that was actually on a 2030 target. Do you agree with that?
I agree that we need to do whatever it takes to bring emissions down, to allow young people to have a future, be able to have some hope for the future. And I'm not saying that because we're alarming children. I'm listening to what they're saying. They're learning about the consequences of climate change at school, and they're worrying about.
Of course, I'm not arguing about the consequences of climate change at all. But you would have to stop to reach your target. You'd have to stop all flying. Aviation would come to an end.
Possibly. I mean,
by 2025.
Again, this is something that we need to look at. We need to look at the aviation industry. We need to do an analysis on what needs to happen, and then we need to take action.
Well, we know what would
on all industries, agriculture, energy, everything.
We know what would happen
to be an expert in these areas.
If we stopped all flying. It would reduce global temperatures using the mainstream climate models by 0.03 degrees. 0.03 degrees. And you would stop all flying for that.
But what you've just said with the IPCC report, we're both in agreement that we listen to that. That's 99% consensus of scientists. That's great. We agree with that. So that report is saying if we don't bring emissions down to halt warming to 1.5 degrees. So aren't we in agreement that we have to?
It's the 2025 target, which is the keystone of your policy.
It's a precautionary principle that
just ask you this. Most homes in this country are heated by gas. Most people cook with gas. The fact is, all of that would have to go in 6 years for a 2025 target, wouldn't it? All of it.
We put a man on the moon before we had the internet and mobile phones.